Hello, this is a short video that introduces some basic architectural model making techniques. It's only a few minutes long and it's very much intended for people who have little or no architectural model making experience. Let's start with the equipment that we require, and first and foremost, probably the most important thing you need is a cutting implement, which is this blade here. And this is one of those ones that has a replaceable blade that you can put into the handle like so. And the type of blade to use is known as a number 11 blade. These are these triangular, sharp, pointy blades. And what you should be doing is replacing those blades on a regular basis as you're making your model. You really want that to be as sharp as possible. And when it starts to dull, that's when it's time to change the blade. You can buy these number 11 blades in little packs of 5 or 10 for a few dollars, and you should go through quite a number of blades as you're working on an architectural model. There's two reasons for always using a sharp blade. One is that it gives you a very clean cut, whichever material you're cutting through. And secondly, you're less likely to have an injury when you're using a sharp blade because you're not pressing as hard in order to cut through the material that you're working with, and therefore you're less likely to slip and therefore have an accident. Other thing to note is this is the type of blade to use when you're making an architectural model. Don't use a curved blade. Curved blades are really good for cutting flesh, not so good for cutting cardboard. And that's the reason why this finger is a little bit shorter than the finger on this hand, because of an accident that I had many years ago. So don't learn that one the hard way. That's the type of blade. You need something to cut against in order to get a straight line, and that's where a steel ruler, such as this one, is a good tool of choice. Prefer not to use an aluminium blade. Aluminium is actually very soft metal, and it's very easy to cut it and actually damage the edge of the blade. Definitely don't use a scale rule, because they are either made out of plastic or aluminium, and they're going to damage the edge, and therefore you won't actually have an accurate scale rule anymore. I prefer to use a slightly longer ruler. This is a 45cm ruler, and just to make it so it's less likely to slip as you're cutting with it, just a bit of masking tape on the back will give it a bit of slip resistance, and it will rest quite nicely on your surface. A couple of other tools that you will need, and their use will become apparent in just a minute. Something sharp and pointy, like a needle or a compass point, that will all be revealed in just a second. Chopstick or a paintbrush, an old paintbrush that you can use for applying glue to an edge. And last but not least, the actual glue that you need to glue the materials that you're working with. Now, the model that I'm going to be making today is made out of cardboard, and the best type of glue to use for that is this one here, known as craft glue, also goes by the name of PVA glue. This is probably the best kind of glue that you can use when you're working with card or paper. It dries clear, it's relatively easy to work with, it doesn't dry too quickly, and it gives you time to adjust and manipulate your pieces in order to get them positioned just so as you're making your model. They're the main things that you need, and really that's about it. Oh, and then a cutting mat, of course, so you don't damage the surface or the table that you're working on. Right, now you might be wondering what that pin was for, and let's say I'm making an architectural model from this template that I've got here. What you use the pin for is to transfer the shape or geometry that you're cutting onto your cardboard, rather than drawing lines or cutting through the paper itself. So if you take the pin and then you just press into the point of each corner so that it leaves a mark through the paper, and you make sure your paper obviously doesn't move as you're doing that, what you then get, having transferred those points, is those points appearing on the material that you're working with itself. And from there you can use that in order to work out where the edges are, and in order to cut a straight line without marking the surface that you're working on with pencil or ink or pen or whatever it is that you're drawing with. Just a word on the material that you're using to make your model. Cardboard is probably the most useful and readily available material for making an architectural model. What I've got here is a type of card known as straw board. Relatively cheap, quite easy to work with. It comes in various thicknesses. This one's about 2mm thick. And if you're a little bit kind of frugal like me, you can actually use the back of a sketch pad or something like that. That is exactly what straw board is. When you're making an architectural model, all the techniques are the same. If you want to make a better quality or presentation model, it really just comes down to the quality of the material that you're making with. So straw board's a relatively cheap material, and it's quite good for rough model making, or for models that aren't quite of a presentation quality. But then if you want to make a higher quality model, you use a higher quality card. The key thing you're looking for in the card when you're making a model is you want it to be a nice, white, bright surface on both sides, and then you'd also want the material to be the same color and uniform all the way through. And basically you pay more for those kind of materials if you want to make that kind of model. The straw board is quite a handy material. You can even use it for presentation models because it actually is very good for representing materials like concrete or cement or some kind of grey rendered material or color. Has just the right amount of texture in order to give you that sense of a particular type of material, and you can contrast that with a higher quality card for surfaces that are painted or rendered. Right, so having transferred those marks onto my card, I basically line up the edge with my ruler, and I just make sure that the points I've transferred are just visible on the edge of the ruler. And you want to hold that down with a firm grip with the masking tape on the back. That makes it less likely to slip. And then using your knife, you're going to cut through that, holding the blade perpendicular to the edge of the metal ruler as much as possible. And instead of doing one heavy solid cut, you're actually going to use several light cuts in order to get through that material. So we'll just go lightly through that like so, and then we'll push again, and it should take you about 4 to 5 cuts in order to get through your material, depending on its thickness. You're doing it for this reason because it gives you a much cleaner edge. You're less likely to slip and therefore have an injury, and basically it cuts through the material in a fairly kind of neat kind of manner. I'm going to do the same over on this edge here. So again, hold down the ruler, make sure that's nice and firm, and make sure the blade is completely under control as you're running through the material. So we're doing several light cuts, keeping the blade perpendicular to the material that we're cutting in order to get through that within 4 or 5 cuts. And then you just need to look carefully to make sure you can still find the points of your compass, but they will still be just visible. Then we can cut through that material like so. And last but not least, we'll just do the same here. Okay, and if you look carefully there, you'll see I've got a very, very nice clean edge, and there's no burring or damage to the actual card itself. And if you're cutting accurately, you should have kind of nice, square, even, right angle corners to the bit of card or material that you're working with. Then that brings us to the technique that we use for gluing, and that's a pretty simple technique. Basically, you want to apply the glue indirectly to the surface that you're working with. So if I just take this PVA glue here, which I've given a shake from before, I'm just going to squeeze a bit off onto this scrap bit of card here, and then you use something like a wooden chopstick or an old paintbrush or a toothpick or something like that. And what you want to then do is to apply the glue to the edge of the card. So I'm going to use this little bit here and just kind of dab it along the edge to make sure that we get it spread nice and evenly and uniformly along that edge. And you're applying just a little bit of glue each time. Like so. And that will start going tacky immediately, which is exactly what you want with the glue. And so for something like this, if I'm going to glue it onto the edge of this card in order to create a wall on the edge of a floor or something like that, just line that up and then position that like so. And as the glue sets, it's relatively easy to work with, and it's tacky enough in order to hold its shape, while also giving you a bit of play so that you can adjust it if you need to in order to get it lined up properly. And if you haven't applied too much glue to the edge of the card that you're gluing, you should just get a very thin line of glue. Now you could scrape that away, but this being PVA glue, it actually dries clear. So if you just kind of leave it as it is, and rather than get your dirty finger and rub it along and therefore smear or smudge the card, that will actually dry quite cleanly and look very neat by the time you're finished. Now if you're working with a bigger bit of card, you might use a bit of masking tape in order to hold that in place with a temporary brace in order to make sure that it glues straight or in exactly the position that you want. But otherwise, that is basically the technique for making a simple architectural model. Nice clean cuts, light strokes, sharp blade, metal edge. The quality of your material will affect the presentation of the model, and then use the pin in order to transfer your geometry or shape onto the material that you're working with itself. That's it. Thanks.